Hey guys! This is California, the third largest state in the United States, home to just under 40 million people and home to some of the most influential industries in the world. California alone is the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, ahead of every other country in the world except China, Japan, potentially Germany, and of course the US itself. But before we get started, subscribe to our channel, give us a like and post the video on social media. Next, we'll talk about something strange happening in California's economy and discuss it publicly. Measuring the exact output of the state is always a matter of debate because the usual international organizations like the IMF or World Bank, which usually document national output figures, don't do it for California because California is not a country. These other countries are still much smaller economies with much smaller populations, and much of their claimed economic success is simply due to the nuances of calculating economic indicators such as GDP per capita. In addition, beyond its hilarious scale, California also does something that many large and highly developed economies fail to do. California's economy is growing, and on average at a faster rate than the rest of the US, which itself is doing quite well by global standards of a developed economy. But of course California is not without its problems and challenges. The industries that have made the state what it is today may be starting to become as large as possible, or in doing so are coming under increasing pressure from around the world. In recent years, California's population has begun to decline for the first time in its history, with record numbers of people leaving for states like Texas, Nevada, Idaho, and Oregon, citing overregulation, the highest personal income taxes in the nation, rising housing costs, and some obvious social problems. This could be bad not only for a state simultaneously dealing with a host of domestic problems, but also for the rest of the US. And to understand why, you should always answer a few simple questions. What makes California's economy so special at the state, national, and global level? Is the state just lucky, or is there some meaning behind the California madness? And finally, is it losing ground against other competitors in the US and beyond? Once we've done all of this, we can update California's place on the leaderboard explaining the nation's economy. When exploring the complex economic question of what has led California to economic prosperity, it is nice when there is one main reason and everything else builds on it. For example, fantastic geography, sound economic policy, or even just the discovery of natural resources. Having one simple conclusion tends to make a lesson memorable and a video enjoyable to watch. So you have to believe us when we say that, unfortunately, there is no single method that got California to where it is today, only a series of fortunes that the state has utilized well throughout its history. This also means that California's economic dominance is not guaranteed. And unlike a sovereign national economy, there are certain advantages but also serious risks that California faces simply because it is part of the union that is the United States. The state as we know it today began even before it was officially recognized as a state when extensive gold deposits were discovered around what later became San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento. Prior to that time, the territory had been settled more quickly, as there was nothing to drive settlers from the more abundant plains of the Midwest or from the industrial and civilized East Coast. Also, it was only a year ago that the territory had become a territory of the United States, but after the discovery of gold, people had a reason to make something of themselves here. In its simplest form, this is the concept of comparative advantage in economic production, where when you consider the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, the region that would later become California basically sucked by all measures. Her land was not much better than that available in abundance closer to the East Coast, and her total labor pool measured in the tens of thousands. The capital needed for improvements, such as railroads or factories, was small because there was no point in investing when there was so much available space everywhere. A situation that is particularly paradoxical given the problems of the state these days. It means that all other regions had a comparative advantage relative to this region and the production of everything, but that all changed when gold made California's land incredibly profitable, giving it a comparative advantage. Once there was a reason for the economy to exist, it quickly developed around this industry. Within 2 years the population had more than doubled and people were moving in not only to dig for gold but to build businesses to support the people who were digging for gold. The development of the region's economy was so rapid that just 2 years after joining the United States, California was able to successfully apply for statehood and receive appropriate representation at the federal level. So, Resource-rich economies end up facing serious problems if they become overly dependent on just one industry. For a long time, California risked losing its gold and then all the businesses that sprang up to support it. Obviously, today California's gold mining is essentially irrelevant compared to its other world-leading industries. So we know that it was able to successfully transition its economy away from raw materials, but that was far from guaranteed. Today, many countries and even regions of the U.S. are trying to transition away from a resource-based economy, and California's lesson can teach us much about how to successfully make that transition. But it is also important to recognize that it had several advantages that many of today's resource-rich economies do not have. One of its major advantages was that it was difficult to get to and from. Before the advent of aviation and even railroads, the only way to get to California was by horse-drawn wagons, over sparsely populated overland routes, or by going all the way around South America on the world's most dreaded 1800s ship routes. Basically, by moving to California, people were aiming to make things work. Fortunately, the region has plenty of arable land, so agriculture quickly became self-sustaining, and with the development of transportation infrastructure came the opportunity to trade more extensively with the rest of the country. It should be remembered that indeed until the mid-1950s, global trade, and even trade between regions within physically large countries like the United States, was much less intense than it is today. Once food production was established and local industry began to sustain the population, global competitiveness became nearly impossible, as it was easier to produce the basic consumer goods of the time than it was to transport them on small ships or over early rail networks. Fortunately, this did not mean that the state became complacent. After a boom in resource extraction, the state made significant investments in education, pioneering universal higher education and founding universities such as Berkeley and the University of California. These were wise investments at the time, but policymakers probably had no idea of the impact they would have on the state a century later. Isolation from the rest of the economy had its advantages as well. Motion pictures using new technologies invented on the East Coast were becoming increasingly popular, and California was a popular place to produce these films, as they later became known. The location was also no accident. Transporting the films after production was easy, and early studios could use motion picture cameras without paying licensing fees to the companies that produced them on the East Coast, since inspectors hardly needed to travel that far. This almost quaint industry, of course, served as the basis for the creation of Hollywood. Today it is one of the most economically valuable industries in the world. After the end of World War II, movie-making technology advanced dramatically, and with Europe bombed to smithereens, only Hollywood could produce quality movies for the entire world. Films were easy to transport and cost virtually nothing to replicate after filming. Today we take such products for granted, but back then creating something that cost the producer as much money to sell that something as many times as he wanted was an extremely important endeavor, and California became the de facto birthplace of this new economic innovation. Not just by providing the growing economy with the best possible sport, it gave it something perhaps even more important: impact. Today, 50 of the 50 highest grossing movies of all time were made in Hollywood. There are occasional hits from other countries, but nothing can compare to the entertainment industry in California. It creates jobs for millions of people, which on average pay pretty well by American standards and very well by world standards. Also makes especially English-speaking countries very close to American norms and customs. From the point of view of a rational economist interested only in quantitative measures, this may not seem very important, but it is one of the major pieces of the puzzle of why the US, and California in particular, has been as successful as it is today. The US is a magnet for investment in skilled labor. If people around the world move somewhere to start a better life, it tends to be the US. The productivity of the average American worker is much higher than the average worker from other countries because American companies invest more money to make them produce more goods. The reason they can make these investments is because money flows into the US from all over the world because people want to invest in their industries. Personally, as an Australian, I feel a familiarity with the US market despite not having been in the country for over a decade. If I were to move somewhere to try and get a real job as an economist, it would probably be the US, and California with its high-paying jobs would be a logical destination. Skilled migrants, who on average contribute to above-average economic output, move to California more often than any other US state, which creates a chicken and egg effect. Skilled people move to California because the world's leading industries are there. And the world's leading industries can work in California because all the skilled people are there. The same is true for investment, and the entertainment industry centered in California is a major factor in this global acceptance. These days, the industry that is arguably even more influential in entertainment is technology, and no other country even comes close to the United States and by extension, California. The universities that the newly founded state of California funded in the 1800s just so happened to attract researchers working on thinking machines and semiconductors in the early 1960s. Early technology companies were created by students from Berkeley, among others. As people figured out what these new machines could do, it became easier to find experts, suppliers, investors, and customers in the region that was becoming known for the technology. These companies have been so successful because, like the entertainment industry built before them, they create value out of nothing. Even Apple, which sells mostly physical products with material costs, adds a significant markup on the raw materials from which the iPhone is made. Even better, the company outsources the entire product supply chain to other countries, so that only the highest-paying jobs created by the industry as a whole remain for California's economy. If the entertainment and technology industries weren't enough, California has applied this value-added approach to other, more traditional industries as well. California still has a large agricultural sector, but it is focused on high-value crops. In particular, their wineries are world-renowned, and a vineyard that produces a $50 bottle of wine creates far more value added within their business than a farmer growing cash crops such as corn. If nothing else, California's economy shows that economic success is rarely, if ever, attributable to just one lucky break. The state would not be the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world today if it had not benefited from more than one gold rush, but it is not without serious problems. California is by many measures a state in decline. Its population is shrinking. The companies that made it successful in recent decades are moving out of the state or simply leaving, and the industries themselves are beginning to struggle as they have no room to grow after virtually dominating global markets. In many ways, the same problems exist in California today that existed 170 years ago. The same thing that many other countries around the world are experiencing is Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is usually associated with resource-rich economies. California has it, but as we've said, it's only a minor component of its economy today. But that doesn't mean it can't have the same problems. There's nothing wrong with having lots of natural resources. Of course, all other things being equal, this can be a great boon to the economy, but it also has some serious side effects that need to be carefully managed. Otherwise, the economy can end up worse off than it was when it started, as is the case today in dozens of resource-rich countries around the world. The first side effect is over-reliance on resources, whereby economic ups and downs start to be determined by commodity prices, which are inherently unstable, and hence the economy is unstable. The second side effect is the crowding out of investment and labor from other industries. When one industry generates virtually unlimited returns, investors will want to put me in that industry, neglecting promising ventures in other industries. Workers will also seek high-paying jobs, often forcing other businesses to raise wages to compete or cut back on production due to staffing shortages. Highly paid workers also have greater purchasing power, which, combined with limited supply, leads to price increases unavailable to people not working in the natural resource sector. Both of these forces in turn further increase the economy's dependence on one income-generating industry, again creating a very unstable economy. This is most often a natural resource problem, but there is no reason to believe that it is exclusively a natural resource problem. The technology and entertainment industry in California, which is a large part of the state's economy, has created exactly the same set of problems. The cost of living is high, and people working ordinary jobs can't afford to live there, which reduces the supply of ordinary goods and services, further reducing the cost of living. The difference today is that people are no longer stuck in California. Moving has become cheap and easy, and since many people working in these industries come from other states or other countries, they are no strangers to the desire to move to where there are better opportunities. And unlike a sovereign state, there are fewer restrictions on moving to other countries within the U.S. From an economic perspective, the best course of action for a country facing Dutch disease is to ensure that the entire economy benefits from the tree of the export industry. Unlike natural resources, technology companies do not need to work in the neighborhood where they dig the material out of the ground. Large employers have already shown that people can work from home, or in extreme cases, move all production to states with looser business restrictions and lower taxes. Right now, no one can predict the future, much less economists. California is almost certainly not going anywhere anytime soon, but it faces international and domestic challenges now more than ever, and it needs to present compelling reasons to retain its industries. For a long time, the assumption that California is just a place where people go to develop technology and produce entertainment has been good enough, but apparently that won't be the case forever. So, out of the country, California has made it to the national leaderboard for explaining the economy, which we've done before. But that was over 2 years ago, and a lot has changed since then. Let's start, as usual, with size. California's GDP has been estimated at $3,400 billion to $3,600 billion, which is comparable to the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world if it were considered its own country. Of course, it isn't. So these numbers are less accurate than the usual World Bank data because things like imports and exports, the main components of economic output, are hired to measure across state borders where, unlike international borders, there is almost no record of what comes in or goes out, but still the state gets a 9 out of 10. Taking these GDP estimates and distributing them to California's population of 39,200,000, the state's GDP per capita is just under $90,000, putting it on par with countries like Norway and Switzerland. That gives it a score of 9 out of 10, trailing only the true outsiders with 6-digit GDPs. Stability and confidence are both meh in the world. Helps because it uses the world's reserve currency, has a huge domestic market for its products and the protection of the US federal government if it finds itself in a bind. But also hurts because it has to compete for talent, investment and spending with other states that have some unfair advantages, such as Texas, where lower prices are subsidized by natural resources. The focus on a few huge industries has created social problems that could eventually lead to economic problems as well. For now, the state gets a score of 8 out of 10. Growth has been high and steady, declining only after the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 global embargo. It has also maintained a growth rate above the US average, which itself is ahead of most advanced economies. California gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, industry. There's not much to say here. More of the world's leading companies are concentrated in California than in any other country in the world, not including the United States itself. Not only are these companies massive, but they are also in high-tech industries that don't rely on extracting value from limited resources. California gets a score of 10 out of 10. Overall, California's average score is 8.8 out of 10, which is noticeably better than 2 years ago, considering it had a perfect score then too. If you liked this video, you'll also like the one we did recently about shrinking areas of the US, and even faster than California. Guys, if you liked our video and you haven't subscribed to us yet, then subscribe now and post the video on social media. There will be more to come in the next episodes. See you soon. Bye.